We'll talk about applying cryptography. We've talked about the cryptography theory, symmetric keys, asymmetric keys, those kinds of things. This is more in how you get them and what you do with them. Next week's major lab, and there's only one major lab next week, is certificate authority, certificate server, installing a certificate server and making it work. You have to do it on your server, install it, and having authentication using certificates to the web server that's on your machine. So it's only one. It's not an insignificant lab. Don't expect to do it in 15 minutes. Probably not going to happen. Several different documents there. This week's not really all that major once you get it installed, but kind of major lab that you're going to do is the application of cryptography. You're going to go find my public key at pgp.mit.edu after you've installed PGP on one of your machines. It doesn't matter which one it is. And send me an encrypted email using my public key. PGP doesn't use the public key private key infrastructure arrangement. It uses what they call a web of trust, which means that I tell you it's my key, so you trust that it's my key. Unlike the public key, the certificate is signed by a trusted third party. This certificate's not going to be signed by a trusted third party. What does happen when I get the email, though, you encrypt it with my public key, I decrypt it with my private key, but I also have a shared secret, a key string that I have to know in order to be able to actually decrypt it. So that kind of generates the key on a regular basis because you have to know the key string that goes in there. When you install it, you will have to put that key string, whatever you want it to be, and unless you're really going to use it later on, I wouldn't worry about trying to get it absolutely positively, really extremely secure. There are step-by-steps, I think, in the book on how to install PGP. It says to go to the PGP website, download it. If you want to do that, be my guest. There should be a copy of free PGP on the 119.168.1 or 3.1 server. You can do it either way. The other ones got a little bit different interface. They all work the same way. They all create the same gibberish as you go through these things. What you probably also will get, as I recall, when you install it is the ability to wipe files, which means that you may want to do that on your own computers. This is something that is available. PGP was developed by the developer whose name I never can remember to protect dissidents in third world countries that were being prosecuted by the dictators based on email content. So it was originally open source. It's since been sold to a private company, PGP, and they still provide, even though it's not obvious, a free version. The free version, what you'll get if you go download it, you'll get a 30-day trial that you can buy. You can buy all the bells and whistles. If you don't buy the 30-day trial, it keeps going. It becomes a little less automatic. The encryption part still works. It's just like going to a web server. If there's something wrong with the certificate, doesn't mean that their certificate doesn't work. Certificate still works. It just means there's something wrong with it. Somebody else's certificate can't enable, gave you one. It expired yesterday. You went to the wrong name. Those kinds of things. So the mechanisms still work. It's just that it may not be what you expected it to be.
Philip Zimmerman.
Philip Zimmerman, thank you, yes. I should remember that, right, Philip?
Yeah.
You will. Actually, I should remember it because Philip's my son's name. Okay, so the objectives define digital certificates. The digital certificates are the things that go with all of this that we send. Public certificate, you can see if you go to a website, if you open it up, you can look at the public key that goes in that certificate. The key is part of the certificate itself. The certificate will say what is for, the thing that it is designed to do. The various types of digital certificates and how they're used, we'll look at that for a few minutes. The components of the public key infrastructure, the PKI. Again, next week you're going to create your own certificate authority. You'll become a a public key infrastructure arrangement, not a trusted one, but you'll put your own in. Tasks associated with key management. Key management here means what's going to happen with these things, what's going to happen with your private key, what's going to happen with the keys for the servers themselves. How will you manage them? Describe the different cryptographic transport protocols. So digital certificates involves understanding their purpose, knowing how they are authorized, stored, and revoked, and determining which type of digital certificates are appropriate for the different situations. If you go to a certificate authority and request a certificate, one of the things you're going to have to tell it is what it's going to be used for. If you're going to use it for a server authentication certificate, that's what you got to get. If you're going to use it for email signing, you get an email signing certificate. If you're going to use it for client identification, authentication, then you get the client certificate. So each of the certificates have a specified use, and that's what you're going to get. They also get kind of picky, rightfully so, when they're server certificates, that they want the name that you're going to use on the internet. If you're going to use an IP address, that's what you put in there. If you're going to use www.somewhere.com, that's what you put in there, so that when it goes to the users, it shows up as a valid certificate. What really happens on these things, typically, and the process that the lab has you do, is you actually generate all of the keys yourself on your own server. You then send your public key to the certificate authority and they sign it. That's what they do, is their signatures on it says, yes, it's good. It's kind of like your driver's license. Could Philip and Scott generate a driver's license?
Yes.
Would it be valid?
No.
Why?
Because it's not real.
It's not real. But what makes it real? What makes it real?
I'm sure that there's something on the card itself, some encryption like the like
What makes, I know they got all that other nonsense on it, but what makes it real?
All the new ones have RFID tags in them.
Yep, they have all sorts of stuff in them, but what makes it real?
The number, the driver's license.
The driver's license number. Boy, I can make up a driver's license number.
I don't know. The seal?
The seal, the signature, I was just looking, these actually aren't signed, but they are signed in some sense in that it's sealed by Virginia, yeah.
The waterproof, the background.
The background and all of that stuff is part of the certificate creation. The certificates that we get from the certificate authorities, everybody look at their driver's licenses now, the certificate authorities get a digital signature on them, and that's what makes them valid, so that when you go to HTTPS something, you don't get the pop-up that said there's something wrong with the certificate, because it's, as long as there's nothing else wrong with it, or it's not a trusted certificate authority, because it's signed by a trusted third party. They're not a trusted third party. The DMV is the trusted third party. They're the ones that issues those things. What makes a check good? What makes a check be other than money in the bank? What makes a check good? Your signature.
And the account routing.
Your signature.
Because the check varies.
But they're still going to check it, and you can still, if you don't have a signature on it. You ever try to deposit an unsigned check?
Yeah, I tried once to see what happened.
Yeah. It didn't work, huh? Didn't work.
Bank of America machines will take them.
We also do, he's talking about the signatures. See, I can't get their attention. He's talking about the signature verification. You know, I can fix all that and make that go down quickly. It's just distracting, and I don't take that long.
What about the people that are going to listen to this lecture?
But,
like, what?
yeah, but that's okay. But just be you guys. You do the same thing in the Sig Verify. That's a good point. Listen to the verification for checks. You're absolutely right. They do that. I do that with the. That's what happens with your debit card too, isn't it?
Yeah.
Does the same thing happen on these certificates? Do we go through a signature verification?
I would think so.
Yep. Well, we check to see that it's signed and it's signed by a trusted third party. In the case of the check, they really do check to see if there's a signature and that it's a valid account and that there's money in the account before they'll actually take payment. So these kind of follow a similar process for the certificates.
Did you lose it?
I have an extra. Digital certificate can be used or associated or bind or bound can be used to associate or bind a user's identity to a public key. Once you get this thing, you get a certificate, and you guys use key fobs, right? Or fobs. What is that? What are these fob things? Generates all this good stuff. How does it know who you are?
Because I got the key here.
Because you get the key here and you know what's on it? Certificate. What's a smart card? Smart card is just the certificate on a card that you can slide in and read the information. So the certificate can be used to identify either the individual or the machine. Public key itself has been digitally signed by a reputable third party. That's what we just went through, all of that stuff. Make it possible for Alice to verify Bob's claim that the key belongs to him. If I sent you a signed email, how do you verify that it's me that sent you the email, that it's my certificate on the email? Because it's a signed by whatever my email address is or my name. Because this trusted third party assigned me that certificate, and I signed the email with the private key, and then the public key is used to say, yes, that was sent by me. So certificates can be used for authentication, identification. Bob sends a message to Alice. He doesn't ask her to retrieve his public key from a central site. Instead, Bob attaches the digital certificate to the message. That kind of sounds really weird, doesn't it? No, then I'm going to send you the certificate. And we kind of do that in a lot of cases. But what we do is encrypt the certificate so that it can be decrypted. The thing that always kind of bugged me is when you send emails with a hash, because the hash is so that you can verify that it didn't get changed en route. Remember that, right? If you change the email, why don't you just change the hash, since the hash is attached to the email? Why wouldn't you do that? Because the hash is encrypted. So lots of different processing and processes goes on in these things to try to keep the information valid, validated, and private, secured. This is the same thing that we've seen over and over and over. In the original message, please call me right away. Man in the middle attack here. Ralph replaces Bob's public key with his own. When it gets here with the new message, no need to call me, Alice retrieves Ralph's imposter public key, but she should be able to know that it's an imposter key if the process works the way that it is, because back to the man in the middle attack, when we gave away certificates, and I'm going to pick on Amy because I did this one with her, and she was kind enough to accept the imposter certificate. Actually, it didn't. What did it do? Worked, right? Except what happened to the imposter? The imposter then got her password because she accepted the key. That's one of the issues with, there are a lot of clickies, my word, around that just say okay to everything. Ever known any of those? Okay, okay, okay. If you say okay, then you may okay something that you really don't want to. The process will give you some indication something's going on there. Digital certificates, and these are typically the things in there, the name, the public key, the name of the issuer, VeriSign, Komodo, Thought, trusted third parties. The digital signature of the issuer, this digital signature is the thing that really makes it valid, not necessarily the issuer. can I issue you a digital certificate from Ranger? Absolutely. Just go to 1060.66.253/search and you can request a certificate and I can issue it to you. Who's going to trust that certificate?
Only people that like know that they got it from.
Only people, yeah, could that, or people that install the root certificate authority certificate on their machine. If you go into Internet Explorer and look at the certificates, the certificate authority, the root certificates are there. Those are the ones that said, hey, these are the trusted third parties. Those get updated occasionally in the Microsoft updates. If you go into Firefox, they'll have a set of those also. So the digital signature, the serial number, and then the expiration date of the public key. The expiration date, how long is it good for? Good way for people to make money here because then you have to keep renewing these things. And they are only good for a limited amount of time. The other reason that you want these things to expire is if something does get compromised, then everything gets changed after X number of months. Certificate authority is the entity that issues the digital certificate, and the only thing that's magic about the certificate authority is they install a service on a server that they can issue certificates. The real magic of the certificate authority is they're in that list of trusted certificate authorities on the computers themselves that say, okay, it was signed by VeriSign. I trust VeriSign. It was signed by Komodo. I trust Komodo. It was signed by Thought. I trust Thought. It was signed by Ranger. I don't have a clue who this Ranger guy is, so I don't trust it. That's what's going to pop up and say there's something wrong with the certificate. So the signature becomes a big deal. The user generates the public and private keys and sends the public key to the certificate authority. There are a couple of ways you can actually have the certificate authority generate the keys for you, or you can generate them and send them to the certificate authority. Insert this public key into the certificate. Sir?
Are you able to ever get like a certificate approved by one of those third parties that generally most people use?
Sure. All you got to do is send them the certificate and money.
And then send it to a site that would then be taking people's information?
Well, yeah, you could, but yes. If you are dishonest, because now they actually do verify who you are before they issue the certificate. Can you go and say, hey, I'm Microsoft, issue this certificate to www.microsoft.com and let me have it? No. Can you say, hey, I'm from hacker.com and you can prove you're from hacker.com? Can you get a certificate then? Sure.
Maybe it'll be like, yeah, I'm from Microsoft.
Microsoft. Actually, if you will go into Internet Explorer and look way on the right side in the certificates, I think 2 of them are still in there that were issued to Microsoft, that somebody did very much what you said. They went to VeriSign and say, hey, we're here from Microsoft and we want our certificates, and they issued it to them without proper identification. Those certificates had to be revoked, and they're still in there as revoked or deleted or invalid or something. I've forgotten the exact term that they used. Certificates, because the situation that you just said, can I do this, kind of happened. They just went up and said, hey, we're here to get the certificates. Here you go. And then Microsoft went to get their certificates and said, not exactly. Registration authority, we get things, and in the web business we get not really certificate authorities, but the controllers, IANA, the name registration, and then we get registration authorities, the GoDaddies and the whoever else is in the world. Certificate authorities and registration authority. The certificate authority would be the validating authority, and then they would allow other computers, other companies to issue the certificates. And that's the difference between those. A certificate revocation list, if something happens to a certificate, what if Philip actually got a valid certificate and then he lost his private key? Is that a big deal? That's a really big deal. So what could you do to fix that? You go back to Certificate Authority and ask them to revoke the certificate. Yeah, that's what they did, yeah. And then they go on the certificate revocation list. And one of the configurations in the web browser that you'll have is how often do you check the certificate revocation list. Sometimes said, I think one of them said every time you go to some place, once a week, once or whatever, but you can configure how often you check this list to see if the certificates that you're accepting really are still valid.
Does that list encompass all revoked certificates that are...
Yes, because they're actually not sent to the browsers. Because how many revoked certificates, I don't know, but how many revoked certificates do you think there are in the world? Probably a lot, and they're actually stored at the Certificate Authority. The machines check the revocation list. So it's something that you might not want to do every time you go someplace, although you can. Certificate repository, publicly accessible directory that contains a certificate, and certificate revocation list published by the Certificate Authority. So they are stored at central locations. This is what one looks like, and this I think is in your book. Just serial number, revocation date, date and time in GMT. And this would be by issuer. I was looking for the issuer name. Signature algorithm, it's got the signature here with the SHA-1 encryption. And this would be from that particular issuer, and it doesn't, and the certificate revocation list last update doesn't say who it is. A certificate repository, search for string, and this is kind of sort of what you're going to see. I'll go through how you can find a certificate at mit.pgp.edu to show you what these things look like. What you're going to be doing with mine is searching for a certificate. You're going to be searching for the public certificate. Anybody can have the public certificate. You encrypt with the public certificate, I decrypt with the private. Public certificate, public key, and I'll decrypt with the private key. The other thing that you can do, and I think I probably said this before, and you should do if you get these things, store them on your machine. They get stored in Windows in your profile. So if your profile gets deleted, your private key just got deleted. What you should do, any keys, any certificates that you have, is export the keys on a piece of removable media that you keep absolute control over, that doesn't go anywhere, so that you've got your private key. That way, if your profile gets deleted, all you got to do is import the private key back to that particular machine. Categories are a lot of those, and these are just 3 of them here: personal, server, published digital certificates. One of the things that may or may not, I don't know, become popular, but with all of the online people not meeting face-to-face, won't sign documents, how can you do that quickly? Because if you've got to mail a document with a signature compared to emailing a document, it's a lot of time difference. You can sign documents with digital signatures with these things. If you get an email signing certificate, for instance, you can sign documents. You can sign Office documents. I've never looked at this. I'm sure you can't open Office. I've never gone through the process with Open Office. Yes?
All my new hire paperwork for my current job was
all digitally signed?
All digitally signed,
yeah. And if you send something, if you want multiple signatures, you can do that. If you send something to somebody, if I sent a signed document to Amy to review and she made changes to it, that invalidates the signature so that it can't go on as a signed document by me. It'd have to come back for review and re-signing, just like you would in a draft arrangement if you were doing it with, paper and signatures and initials and stuff like that. So these things can be handy in a lot of different ways. This same thing that I think we talked about. The web server administrator creates keys in the digital signature. the digital certificate, let's see, what do we do? The user clicks pay now. Oh, we've talked about this one before. The digital certificate is presented and accepted by the browser. This is the, let's do something. The web server decrypts all these things. How do we get the certificates from one location to the other? Credit card is encrypted and transmitted. So the digital certificate is printed and accepted by the browser because there was not anything wrong with it. The address was right. It was by a trusted third party, and it was valid. All of those sorts of things. It was the right kind of certificate. So we use the public key. We may use the public key to encrypt our credit card information, send it back to the web server. The web server would then decrypt it with the private key. That is the way the theory works. But I think we said last time that public key, private key, the public key process can take up to as much as 1,000 times the resources as the private key. To encrypt a single transaction, yes, you would do that. If you're encrypting a connection that has several things going back and forth, what probably is going to happen is when you go to HTTPS somebody, hacker.com, we'll still go there, hacker.com sends me its public certificate, and that's okay because anybody can have the public certificate. It's public. My machine would generate an encryption key. I would then encrypt my key that I generated with the public key, send it back to the web browser, to the server, hacker.com, which would then decrypt it with the private key. We would then use the symmetric key in order to encrypt the data because it's going to be really much faster to use the symmetric key encryption. The problem with symmetric key encryption is getting the symmetric keys from one location to the other and then keeping them private or keeping them secret. Single-sided certificate, Bob sends one digital certificate to Alice along with his message. A dual-sided, the certificates can function as a signing and an encryption certificate. What this one says, a single-sided, you're using the same certificate for signing and encryption. Dual-sided, a signing certificate and an encryption certificate are separate in these things, which is going to give you more security. The X.509 digital certificates, the X.509 is just the format that the certificates are in. And you can go to a secure website, look at the certificate, it's going to be in an X.509 format. Nice list that's in the book, what's going to be in the digital certificate itself. This is the fields in the certificate, lots of pictures here. What I think we'll do when we get done here, see if we can pull one up and take a look at it. This is what the certificate itself would look like. Actually, we can't because I got a certificate. I'll go through the export-import process with you. This is valid from December the 31st, 1996 until December the 31st, 2020. That's a long time. This is the certificate authority's certificate. They are valid for a long period of time. The email signing certificate that I got for free is good for 1 year. It has to be renewed on an annual basis. Typically, the web server signing certificates, I think, are good for a year. So that all goes to what if it gets compromised and you don't know about it, then it can only be compromised for a certain amount of time. Public key infrastructure, did we beat this one enough? Public key, private key. It's a framework, get the stuff, the digital certificate, PKI is the digital certificate management. The PKI is the structure, it's not the certificates themselves. And then there's a number of standards, the PKCS. You can look at those. I'll pick on the guys in the back. Did they ask any of the standards on that test, PKCS? Because usually they used to ask one of them, and I forgot, like 5, I think. No, it wasn't 5, certificate based. But these are just the standards that are used for each of the processes over here in the description and in the name. many of those. Export file, cryptographic message. What format are you going to put it in? You can pick if you want, unless you really know what you're picking. You probably just want to use the defaults, imports and exports. What do you do with these things? The trust models. Trust model, the trusting relationship between these things. We have a direct trust between the two individuals because one person knows the other person. That's what we're going to have between you and me, isn't it not? A direct trust because I've told you where to go get my certificate. Different than the trusted third party. I could give you the certificate. I could post the certificate in a share. Actually, I think it is in a share out there too. Third-party trust is the public key infrastructure that a third entity is set up to be a trusted third party. I never have figured out how you actually get to be a trusted third party. That sounds like the way to be, though, isn't it? All you got to do is sit there and issue all these certificates all day long. You've got to identify the people, though. Direct trust is not feasible when dealing with multiple users who each have digital certificates. 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, what about 10,000? And that's why the PGP is kind of a direct trust, but it's a web of trust. There is a central repository that you can go get the certificates from. Hierarchical trust, distributed trust, and bridge trust model are the things that we have there. And the trust models, the hierarchical trust, the certificate authority, the digital certificates with the public keys, the certificate authorities issues them directly. These are kind of, okay, this is kind of like, okay. Distributed trust, we have the certificate authority and then intermediate certificate authorities. So the certificate authority issues it to the intermediates and then the intermediates issue their certificates themselves. One of the things that you'll read and should be if you become a certificate authority, because in Active Directory you can and then use certificates for authentication. Once you have issued the certificate authority should go offline. Because you really don't want to take a chance on getting it compromised. If you compromise the certificate authority machine, you compromise all of the certificates that it has ever issued. So we have here the bridge trust model. We got the certificate authority, the bridge certificate authority, and then the intermediate authorities. It's just who actually sends the certificate. They all come from the same authority. Managing these things, a certificate of policy, published set of rules. What are we going to do? How are we going to use certificates? What are the rules for using them? What are the rules for publishing, for distributing certificates? And the practice statement, how, in detail, how the certificate authority uses and manages the certificates. How are you going to manage your certificates? What are we going to do with the things? How are you going to store them? How are you going to store your server certificates? You're going to just leave them there if the server crashes? Too bad, so sad. That's what a lot of people do. Are you going to take the certificates off, make a copy of them, store them someplace safe so that if something does happen to the server, you can still continue without having to go buy another one? The certificate life cycle, and I'll try to go through this quickly because there's no real magic here. We're going to create creation, suspension, revocation, and expiration. Creation, obviously, when you create the certificate. Suspension is a temporary revocation. Where we say, something may be wrong, I don't know, I may have lost it, and then we find that you can suspend the certificate. If it's revoked, it's revoked. It's no longer good, will never be good again. So the difference between suspension and revocation, suspension, it can be reinitiated as a valid certificate. Revocation, it's never going to be a good certificate again. And expiration is the expiration date has to be renewed. Part of the certificate itself is that how long is it good for? It is good or it isn't good. Key storage usage and handling procedures for these things. Key storage, if you've got a lot of keys, that can be a big deal, couldn't it? Where are you going to store them? And we're not talking about personal keys here. We're talking about the business keys. Depends on how many secure servers you have. Sir? So where you'll store them in the key escrow? How are you going to store them? You need to have copies of these things. Can be stored on the user's local, they can be stored on the local system. You probably don't want to do that because if you lose control of the private key, you've lost control of all of your decryption capability. Anybody that's got your private key can decrypt anything. Software-based storage that may leave the keys open to attacks, and if somebody gets them. You know, hardware is an alternative to storage base. Put them on your flash drive. I usually have this thing in my, I don't have very many, but I have a flash drive that I have the certificates that are the keys that I do have on here. I've got a lot of them that have expired on here also that I just need to delete. That means that if I go to a machine and I need the certificate, I can import the certificate. If my profile gets deleted, then I can import the certificate and all of my encryption is still valid. Things that you may get certificates for if you use the encrypting file system. Export the certificate. Because if you don't and you lose the certificate and you can't decrypt the encrypting key that's in the document, you've got this really cool encrypted document. And it's a really cool encrypted document. And it stays encrypted because we forgot to make a recovery agent when we did that. You can share those things. You can have recovery agents for it. It can be stored on smart cards or in tokens. Lots of different places to put these things. The smart cards, the tokens that you have the certificates on them. That's what's there. Multiple keys or dual keys can be created if more security is needed. Dual keys, more than one key used to do the process. It's kind of like in certain military functions, and you guys may have had, you ever have anything that had two key authority, two key control, dual key control? Similar thing here, you have to have both keys in order to do that. Huh?
Army usually has that.
Yeah, we had that too, for certain, to get into certain things. I'll get armory. I thought you said army. Yeah, the armory. Yes. Yes. A lot of time, they have two keys on safes for certain keys for encrypted communications. Also, depends on how sensitive any of those things are. So the two keys in order to make it work. And this one key is used for encrypting, and the second key is used for the digital signature, so that we're not using the same key for both. You can use the same key for both or use them for different ones. Procedures, escrow. Escrow means somebody else holds the key for you. Expiration, renewal, revocation, and recovery. Recovery is the key recovery agent if you have one specified. Suspension and then destruction. I messed up one time when I got one of my certificates and said, okay, how do I fix this? And their answer was, ask us to revoke it and get a new one. Because they don't really like to change much on these things. It kind of destroys the sequence as well as the validity of them. You can't make, once you get it issued, you can't really make a lot of changes to it. This is the group, and in the grouping in here, the digital, they talked about that up there. What you do is split the key into different parts. Different users get the different keys. So we've got users here that have part one, 2 users, and 2 users have part 2. 2 users have part 3. In order to reconstruct the key, you've got to get a user from each part, a holder from each part to reconstruct the key before you can use the key. Now these things are for obviously really secure things, not for my email signing certificate, not for the demonstration on how you encrypt email, probably not for the email that you would even send in your business. But that is one of the ways to do that. Transport protocols, file transfer, web, VPN, and email can be categorized for the applications that they're using. These are the things that we typically are going to encrypt. Email, why would we want to encrypt email? So that everybody can't read it. Email is basically just a text document. Anybody can get to it, can read it unless you encrypt it. VPN, that's specially set up, configured to encrypt data that goes from one point to the other. Web, the HTTPS, and then file transfer secure FTP, we would want to use certificates, some sort of protection in each of those. FTP is a vulnerability. FTP is very vulnerable. Usernames, passwords, everything is transferred in clear text, so anybody can watch the connection, can see everything, including the content of the documents. Encrypting it obviously makes it more secure with the secure FTP. SSL, secure socket layer, developed by Netscape, securely transmitting documents over the internet. That's what we typically use when you set up the connection, the secure connection, HTTPS, in order to securely transfer information. And we think about this mostly to transfer credit card information, banking information, those kinds of things. Some sites, depending on what you're transferring, the data may all be secure. When you go to Moodle, you actually go through an HTTPS connection in order to authenticate. So the authentication, your username and password, is sent encrypted to Moodle. After that happens, you go to a non-secure connection. It gives you a cookie, you have a session cookie, and that's what validates you from page to page, the courses that you're in. Transport layer security, the guarantees of privacy and data integrity between applications communicating over the internet. It's an extension of SSL, so it's not us communicating, it's basically the servers talking to each other. SSH is thought of, I think, as a Linux kind of arrangement. There is an open SSH if you want to use something like this that you can use you can install on a Windows server. It allows you to have a secure FTP connection as well as a secure remote desktop connection, so that people can't intercept these things if they're in a position to intercept them. Again, thought of as a Unix, Linux-based. It is native to Linux. It's not native to Windows. It can be installed on Windows. Open SSH. And I use a client called Tunnelier because it's just too easy. Give me a secure FTP connection as well as a secure remote desktop connection. And I can get a console, if I want a console connection, I can use it also. But the file transfers, SSH, R login, remote copy, and remote shell are things that become secure when you use SSH. HTTPS, SSL, TLS, secure hypertext transfer protocol we've talked about. VPN, point-to-point tunneling protocol. We've done exercises on that in the Windows classes. For those of you who haven't done those yet, we will do those. It's the easier one to configure. What it does, point-to-point tunneling protocol, depending on how we set it up, we could go from the machine to the server, have a completely secure connection from point to point. We could go from endpoint to endpoint, firewall to firewall, server to server. If we go firewall to firewall, the thing to keep in mind is that everything on the backside of that firewall is unencrypted. We have an encrypted connection, a VPN connection from our router to the router at Virginia Beach for the connections, uses access control list, for the connections that send your private information, your credit card information if you do the credit card, your Social Security number. This isn't important unless it's your Social Security number. If Sean's gets compromised, Amy doesn't really care. But when it's Amy's Social Security number, it's a big deal. So we just protect them all. But point-to-point protocol, not everything has to go through that, so you have to have access control list, what goes into the tunnel and what doesn't go into the tunnel. Not everything. Do we need to encrypt the Moodle requests that go to Virginia Beach? Probably not. We hope not anyway. Point-to-point protocol over Ethernet really is something designed to make DSL easier to use. And that's about how far we're going to go with that one. Layer 2 tunneling protocol. This is one that Microsoft and Cisco kind of work together on, merges the Cisco's Layer 2 forwarding protocol with point-to-point tunneling protocol. Industry standard, it's there. This one's a little bit more difficult to configure to make work than point-to-point. Point-to-point, PPTP, is the easiest one to make function. IPSec, set of protocols. Well, IPSec is really just the structure. It's the shell that all these other things go into. If we do IPSec, it's not a protocol. IPSec, we would put in DES or AES as the encryption protocol. We put in MD5 or SHA-1 as the hashing protocol. So you pick whichever of those you're going to use. What that does is allow changes, upgrades as the protocols change. Because if it were just a protocol, we'd probably still be in DES, which is an unsecure protocol now, an unsecure security protocol. Since it is the shell and we just use it as the structure to put the protocols into, you can go to AES. When the new hashing protocol comes out, Whirlpool, I think is the name of it that I've read, is one that's supposedly coming. You'll be able to integrate it into the structure here and use it for the protocols. 3 areas of protection: authentication, confidentiality, and key management. Each of those things, it does them for us, kind of, sort of. This is actually probably something that you haven't thought about. Where do each of these different elements reside in the OSI model? I know everybody loves the OSI model, but it really is a pretty big deal when you're in security. What runs where? What can you get? What can't you get? So at the application layer, PGP. So it will be at the application layer, nothing to presentation. The session layer, Kerberos and SSL, the secure socket layer are here. The transport layer, TCP, the network layer, IP, is where IPSec is. As we go through those things, look at those things. IPSec, we've done this 2 modes, transport mode and tunnel mode. The difference is transport mode goes from point to point, goes from computer to computer. Tunnel mode will go from generally firewall to firewall, create a tunnel across the internet. Tunnel mode, typically the things on the back side inside this room would be insecure until you got to the router. The router would then have the tunnel that goes to Virginia Beach. Once it got in the tunnel, it would be encrypted. So it got to Virginia Beach, then it would be decrypted and it would be non-encrypted on the back side of the network at Virginia Beach also. We have authenticating header and encapsulating security payload, encapsulation security payload. I've seen it several different ways. You can use both, or you can use authentication header. If you don't need to encrypt the data, but you want to be sure about who you're talking to, the computers are talking to you, you just use authentication header. That mutually authenticates the 2 machines. When you log on to the server, the workstation authenticates itself to the server authenticates itself to the workstation. Why we want to do that? If Sean comes in and decides he wants to capture our connection, does a connection hijack, we really want to have that sort of assurance that this is who it is. I think where that really becomes a little more important is when you allow people to connect from home. You want to have some sort of assurance that, yes, that's really who's connecting, and that's really the machine that's connecting, the one that we said is okay. So you can use authentication header. If you need to encrypt the data also, the encapsulation security payload, the ESP, would do that. How much of this thing is encrypted is what we're really talking about. The IPSec header. In this thing, if we encrypt the entire packet, what happens to the IP information? It's encrypted. What's the router going to do with it? Going to dump it because it can't read it because it's encrypted. If we encrypt the entire packet, what we do is put a new header on it, an unencrypted IP address, and that would be the tunnel endpoint. so that it gets to the tunnel endpoint. Once it gets to the tunnel endpoint, we tear this header off, decrypt it, and it can go to the destination IP address. So tunnel mode uses this. Transport mode, we have an authentication header in TCP. The original header is here. It's not encrypted, so you can use the original IP header. In tunnel mode, we use the authentication header, the new IP header, and the original IP header. We still have to, the original IP header is going to be encrypted, so anytime we put anything in tunnel mode, we're going to put a new header on it. The new header basically just allows it to be routed across the internet. Tunnels aren't really tunnels like you do. If you're driving down the road and you go to a tunnel, you go into a physical tunnel. These tunnels are encrypted connections. They still go across all the routers that are between here and wherever we're going to. Could be 5 routers, 10 routers, 20 routers, whatever's between here and Hong Kong if we're creating a tunnel to Hong Kong. Could be 1 router, 2 routers if we're doing a connection between here and Virginia Beach. But they have to be able to read the IP addressing information. SMIME is the Internet extension. This is configurable in Internet Explorer. I'm not sure it's configurable in the one that you have because I don't think they gave it to you. It's a common email transport. It's secure multi-purpose extension, allows email to become a little more secure. Email is very insecure by default because all it is a text document that gets sent out. It's built into the vast majority of modern email software and interoperates between them. If you don't have that, if you want to use encryption, and again the lab for this week, installed on the summer slide, is PGP. PGP is, I think, a pretty good piece of software, particularly for the price. It's really good.
Pretty good privacy.
Yeah, pretty good privacy, pretty good price. Yeah. So we talked about certificates a little bit. The certificate authority, the authority that issues these things. What makes a trusted certificate authority trusted is somebody out there said, "Oh yeah, you guys are trusted." They go into the machines, into the browsers. The browsers have a list of certificate authorities that are trusted. And then the types of certificates, personal server, software, what are we going to do with them? Each server type has a function. Multiple certificates, SSH, SSL to make the things that we can do to make transporting data a little more secure. And we talk about that. How easy is it to get, based on what we've done, how easy is it to get to this stuff, really? Has anybody been able to intercept the traffic from Mr. Geiss's computer yet?
Has anybody tried?
I don't know. Have you tried?
No.
Give it a shot.
He's on different networks, for one.
For one, he's on a different network. That really makes it hard, doesn't it? Because what did the man-in-the-middle attack do? What was its basis? Same network, ARP spoofing. Where we told everybody that we're the default gateway and it sends all the traffic to us. So that becomes one of the issues. He is on a different network.
Is all of the administration on that network?
Yes.
So then, theoretically, if we were able to get into one of those computers up there in the front?
Theoretically, if you're able to get onto one of those computers up in the front and raise your authority level, privilege escalation, to be able to install software, then you might be able to get something. What would keep you from getting something? An F? That might too, yeah. What about encryption? Did anybody ever get anything that, from any of these connections? Did anybody go into it? Because we didn't go to any Kerberos. What about a Kerberos connection? What are you going to see? Encrypted data, you're going to see a Kerberos hash. maybe. And maybe is really the key. Those are hard to catch. So are you going to be able to see something? Lots of configuration, and I know I wander around a lot in a lot of these things, but a lot of that is, there's a lot of things you can do to make it secure. There's a lot of things you can do to make it insecure also. But what can we do? What can't we do? So to get on that machine, you'd have to be able to get in the office and log on, right? Well, Philip could just take his laptop up and plug it in, right? That'd be easier.
That would be a lot easier.
A lot easier. Unless we had layer 2 security configured.
Would it work? And if you have layer 2 security configured.
Yeah. See, I mean, what I'm trying to get you to think about is this is really a big field. What can be done, what can't be done. It's not, you can do this thing and this thing and this thing. There's lots of different things that you might or might not want to do. What we'll look at here for just a second, then we'll take a break, is where are all these things? We go to Tools, Internet Options, Content. We see the certificates, and in the certificates we got personal. I have an email signing certificate in here that I imported. Well, I'll show you how to export it here just in a second. Other people, I don't have any. Intermediate certification authorities. We saw those in the certificate authority process. And there's a big list of them that are in here. The trusted root authorities, there's a number of those also that you can look at. Trusted publishers, and here we go, untrusted publishers. There's the Microsoft ones that somebody got that weren't supposed to. If you want to see what's in a certificate, and this is one of those, and I know you have trouble, you can go on your own browser and look at these things. You can view the certificate. The details, the version, the serial number, the signature algorithm, the hash, the issuer. See, VeriSign's the one that messed up with Microsoft there. Valid from, this was June 2001, January 2001 to January 2002. The subject, the public key, all of those things are in the certificate. When we talk about the X.509 certificate, these are the contents of the X.509. These are X.509 certificates. The certification path, this says fraudulent, not Microsoft. They don't want to use it. Let's look at one that may not be fraudulent. Let's see if mine's fraudulent. Personal certificate. View. The certificate is intended for the following purposes. Protects email messages. It's got a bunch of numbers, but that's its certificate. It's an email signing certificate. Issued to Skyline.edu. Issued by, this is the name of the issuer. Valid from 11/2/2010 to 11/3/2011. And the issuer statement, you have a private key that corresponds to this certificate. I have the private key. And I'm supposed to have the private key, right? Go to the details, the same kind of stuff that goes through here. The dates, who it's issued to, the public key, the authority. The certification path in this one, however, doesn't say that it's fraudulent. It says it's issued by Komodo, and then it goes down the list until it gets to me, the path that it got issued with. The UTM would be an intermediate authority. It says down here, certificate status, this certificate is okay. That's really not a very formal way of saying that, is it? But those are there. If I wanted to, I was going to export this certificate, I just select it, export, next, and this one doesn't allow me. This is what I messed up, and when I imported it, I didn't allow export of the private key. You really want to be able to export your private key because you want a copy of that. I have the private key for this certificate on the flash drive. But this one would export, no, do not export the private key, doesn't allow me to do anything else. When you get certificates, look at the advanced to be sure that it allows exporting of the private certificates or the private key, because you do want to be able to do that. And then next, the file name, browse, and then the file name. It'll go somewhere. Export keys, it says no, and then we finish. The export was successful. Had I been able to export the private key, it would have asked me for a password that I would then need in order to import it. And let's make it go away. I don't have a certificate anymore. Let's see if I do have a certificate on this flash drive. I may not, actually.
Like, I hope I do.
No, I've got it somewhere. I just have to find it at times. Keys. Yeah, I have it someplace else. But we can go through the process here, so it's not that particular one. It's not happy, is it? This is an expired certificate. Okay, the import was successful. This one went someplace else. It wasn't a personal certificate. But the import, it's a matter of going through and knowing where it is, obviously, before you start it. Questions? Probably ready for a break, aren't you? Let's take a break.